Great, thank you, Isabel, for the introduction. Yeah, so I'm part of the NLP group, Department of Computer Science, Faculty of Engineering, of course, at UOS. So I work in the field of computational linguistics, which is it's quite a broad field, but if you want to really reduce it down, what we do at Sheffield that fits in this field is we have a strong focus on turning text, this fairly semi-structured to unstructured data, and converting this into maybe some comprehension of the concepts expressed in the text, and then maybe even getting this into something that can support us in making decisions, perhaps decisions in the medical domain, such as would be supported by Roland's work, or in the historical domain, maybe in planning, many other applications. But decision support from text is one way of formulating NLP. You may have heard of the AI effect, something introduced by Pamela McCorduck, and the general idea behind it is that artificial intelligence is much less impressive when we know exactly how it works. For example, the predictive text on your phone perhaps isn't so so fascinating and revolutionary as it would be to someone in the 1970s if you showed it to them then. And the same goes for machine translation. And so to avoid succumbing to this, this talk will contain very little deep technical detail. I hope it stays impressive. So, let's talk a bit about language. Language evolved in organisms over a very long period of time. But to start off with, we basically only had a few communicative utterances. We could only make a few sounds for fairly primal basic functions like alerting people to danger, alerting others to danger, mating communications, fighting, and this sort of thing. And then beyond this, the ability to express a few vowels appears, but there's not a huge distinction you can make on the sliding scale of vowels, as I'm sure many people in speech and hearing would say. For example, an a and an maybe are quite similar. You can't express a very broad range of concepts just with vowels. However, we evolved. And humans started standing up. And when you stand up, you have this problem where if you start drinking, for example, or eating, there's a risk that what you're consuming will fall down your windpipe where you breathe. And so we developed this thing called velar closure, which lets us shut off the windpipe very rapidly. And this lets us produce consonants. Consonants are brilliant. They can go around the vowels, and they can make they greatly explode the range of different sounds that we as humans can produce. And so that's driven some of our evolution. So that's pretty cool. But the problem with spoken language is that, well, firstly, it's very transient. It's very temporary. It won't last too long, and also it's harder to send it further than you can shout. Maybe you can ask someone to kind of remember what was spoken and go on, but it's an unreliable medium. So I guess a few thousand years ago, we developed a way of storing this language. Here, for example, a cuneiform tablet. And we can store the information and put it in a permanent place so it becomes more stable. We can communicate over very long distances, and we can have a record of what we've said. So this is a big advance in language. And then the way we were encoding our text became maybe a little bit of an art form, and a lot of language, a lot of information was stored in this format. And then in the 20th century, we were able to digitize this information. Or maybe even digitize it in a more effective way. And so we had, suddenly there was much less of a problem if we dropped what we were writing. Information access became very easy. Sending information became very easy. And of course, once we realized sending information became easy, with digital text, emails started to appear. And you have just the same text as you might have started off with, but also you add a little bit of metadata. Maybe the time the message was sent, where the message has come from, definitely where the message is going to, that's kind of critical, this kind of information. And so this starts to replace conversation a little bit more than written letters did originally. And so moving on, now people are using social media as another form of conversation, where we have a lot of metadata and maybe a very, very short message, and these fly back and forth. I don't think it's quite as big an evolutionary step as the others, but in some ways it is, and we'll come to those shortly. So let's talk about social media. Social media is this kind of poster child for big data, a term you've probably heard more than enough today, where you have this vast quantity of information in a digital format that we can go and analyze. So here's big data. It's brilliant. So big data promises new insights, is a cool buzzword if you live in 2013, was a cool buzzword if you live in late 2013. It definitely causes a lot of headaches if you want to store it, if you want to look anything up in it. People ask, what is big data? Where does big data begin? I think the stock answer is about 5 terabytes. Maybe not always a helpful answer. So what is big data? We can maybe get some definition of big data and how it relates to social media. And Gartner like to define it with their 3V models. So with their 3V model of big data. So the first V is velocity. So the data should be coming at a very high speed. Twitter has 255 million users writing and creating content every month. Facebook has 1.3 billion users per month writing and creating content. So that's the velocity. How about the volume? How much do they write? Well, on Reddit you have 34 million posts per month. On Twitter, admittedly shorter messages, but you have 650 million messages per month. So that's the volume, that's our second V. And the third V is variety. It's important to get a wide range of information in here. And certainly on social media, people will talk about things like financial transactions. Maybe they'll talk about natural disasters and things happening in the world around them. Certainly it's used to talk about social events and arrangements with friends. And then the other 90% of social media tends to be filled up with Justin Bieber. But of course we couldn't forget the cats either. So there are many online social networks, and trying to study them as a whole is really difficult. What we really need, we need a model organism, right? We need something of social media that we can pick as researchers as a stable, shared platform where we know the deficiencies, we know the benefits, we know how it behaves. So we need our Drosophila melanogaster for social media. We need our fruit fly, like the biologists have. And so we have Twitter, which fulfills this function. And that's the social platform I'll focus on for the rest of the talk. Let's talk more about artificial intelligence. So NLP is part of artificial intelligence, natural language processing. We say human knowledge is expressed in language. So computational linguistics is very important. This means we can process our knowledge. And what we roughly do in NLP, I guess, is we start with a sequence of bytes, or a sequence of numbers, if you like, and that's our digital representation of a document. And then some magic goes on, which typically looks a lot more like the picture on the left than the one on the right. And what we end up with is actionable knowledge. But it involves a lot of programming. And as computer scientists, I think most of us get a little bit sick of programming. And of course, why bother programming at all? We don't need to program, right? We can let the computer go and program itself through machine learning. So the general goal with supervised machine learning is to make decisions about things, or given an individual task, make some kind of decision based on information and examples that you've seen before. Of course, you don't even have to always give it something to see before, but it's easiest if you do. It's a little bit like human learning. You need a lot of input before you can start to make inferences and generalizations. So when we apply this to NLP, we start off with some text, and then also some examples of what we want the computer, what we want the system to do. And then the machine learns from these examples and hopefully learns how to perform the task we're trying to teach it. And often, in the best cases, it works out like a game of connect the dots. So the computer just has to build this representative model like this. But sometimes, if you need to learn something that's outside of the scope of the data or the way you formulated your problem, you could have a bit of difficulty with machine learning. And that's the kind of frontier that we're always up against in NLP. Let's talk a little bit about understanding language. Social media text is surprisingly formal, which you wouldn't get given the typical social media user that's portrayed. So here's an example of very formal, correct, strict grammar in social media. They see me rolling. What's going on here? We don't know this word. It's missing a letter, perhaps. Maybe it's a typo. They've done it again. Well, we know that G-dropping is something mapped directly from speech into the way people speak. And they use it to express how they express themselves and represent a persona in written text from how they're talking. Incidentally, doing this is quite a good predictor of future income and education level. But here we have a completely consistent example using this slightly unusual form of grammar, but there isn't a single mistake. It's applied consistently all the way out, completely flawless. And of course also, the way they've expressed themselves non-standardly gives us some information about the author. So rather than seeing them as making mistakes, we see them as telling us something about themselves. These are the kinds of things we come across in social media. So this example, OMB, someone wrote something very shocking in a tweet and put OMB at the end. I thought, well, hang on, of course they mean OMG, right? It's a typo. It's not a typo. The B is for Justin Bieber. God is out. He's 290s. Justin is in. Another expression of how different people talk on social media and how you can get something about the author. One person might say, shall we go out for dinner this evening? Another person might say, hey yo, when are you going to let me tap that? So of course, many people make some kind of guesses, say, well look, the people who don't spell right on Twitter, the people who don't have the right grammar in social media, they're just not very literate, and that's where the mistakes are coming from. So someone looked at the spelling ability distribution of users, I think in about 16-year-olds, maybe 11th grade in the US. I don't know their grade system too well. And they looked at the distribution of students who also used a lot of slang on Twitter and in text messages. And so this was the rough distribution we have, with the score at the bottom is just the percentile grade of their spelling ability. Let's look at the users who type perfectly in their text messages and in social media. There's no statistically significant difference at all. So what we gain from this is people, when you see slang on the internet, people are choosing very deliberately exactly how to write. They're very strict in how they write it. We saw this example. A guy working in Canada was looking at gang forums, trying to get some idea of all the different dialects that you can see there. And so this, of course, when it comes to doing NLP, this is a huge problem. We have this word that's out of our vocabulary. We have no idea how to process it. It's going to turn up as an unknown word. We can't parse the sentence and find out what's going on. Difficult. Because that's not how you spell lucky. Unless, it turns out, unless you're in the Crips. Because CK stands for Crip Killer. So no one in the Crips would ever type CK. And every time they write a word like lucky or sucker, it comes with a CC. So again, there's another social variable you can extract just from someone's misspellings, if you like. So there are some distinct challenges that are really big when doing NLP over social media text. I guess one of the big ones is guessing which language the text is written in, which is kind of important, right? If you don't know the language, you have no hope of maybe even finding the word boundaries for something written in Chinese characters, for example. So what language is it? So the first is an example. I don't know Dutch, but it looks like reasonably correct Dutch to me. But they've blended in a couple of different entities. We can see a name of a French actor, and then they finished off with English. This is fairly common, a little bit of English dropped in here or there in non-English tweets. The second tweet, we have so many non-standard words, so many non-standard spellings, that it's actually really difficult to identify the language of this automatically. My guess is, because we see news and then we see the hashtag constant contact with English words in it, I think it's probably English. But for an automatic system, this is tricky. The next challenge is, of course, all these non-standard words that come from bad typing, or, well, yeah, unusual words. If you get the space in the wrong place, in the first example, you can see you've gone from I wonder if, which is 3 standard words, to I wonder if. So you have 2 non-standard new words. So 1 space in the wrong place gives you 2 problems. In the second case, no homework tonight, surprising. And these are all real tweets we've had problems with. Maybe there should be a bit of homework in that case, I'm not so sure. So, the third challenge, this is a big one, is finding names, identifying names of people, of organisations, of things in tweets. And this kind of really lets you know what the content is about, who it's related to, and helps people searching over data so they can pick out exactly what you need. Derek with a lowercase d is no longer a person, he's never recognised as an entity. Miles with a lowercase m might be a person, with a capital M in a distance is always a person. I'm not sure how to deal with him. Marie Claire is often used as a magazine, so it should not really be a person. Exodus Porter is always recognised as a person. It sounds like a very nice person, but it's actually a beer. But these are just the normal, plain run-of-the-mill examples. Spicy Pickle Jr. is apparently actually a person, as you can see. So, let's talk a little bit about old news. Boring news, old news, tired news from 2010. Social media defends against earthquakes. There was a joke, I guess maybe 2009, 2008, that if someone tweeted, theoretically, tweeted about an earthquake that they felt, then the tweet could accelerate, well, would be going faster than the waves through the earth, and would surpass the earthquake. Seemed a bit of a kind of an academic theoretical joke, but immediately the Japanese and the US Geological Survey started integrating social media sensors into their early warning systems. And the next year they reduced the response time for their earthquake warnings by 2 or 3 seconds, down from 20 seconds to maybe 17 or 18 seconds, which is a critical difference if you're trying to escape from a building that's just collapsing. So it saves lives directly. But that's old news. How about 2012? Kind of old news as well. Social media predicts epidemics. Let's start off with a dead crow. That's the way to go with this one. So we know already that the presence of dead crows indicates West Nile virus in a region. And the crows start dying before the people get the virus. Well, that's okay. And maybe if we could afford to send people out looking for dead crows, we'd have some early warning system that would help our hospitals better prepare and plan in terms of staff, medicine and other resources. But of course, if someone tweets there's a dead crow in my garden, you have this information straight away from social media. And so you can see on the curve now you have this very consistent case of crow death reports and then West Nile virus cases. So you can predict West Nile virus. Then you can start taking care of the vulnerable groups and preparing your hospitals and having a strong real-world impact. Social media predicts you personally getting flu, 2012, same thing. Still old news a little bit, I guess. So in this case, some researchers in New York State looked at the GPS coordinates and the GPS history of users in New York City. And I guess that accounts for maybe 30% of tweets, so fairly prevalent. And they looked at the social network of all these people, so they had an idea of who they were hanging out with and where they'd been. And then they built a system that can detect from a tweet whether or not a person feels ill, whether they've succumbed to some kind of flu. And based on this, so they have location histories, and you can look to see which people have been near which other people. So if you've tweeted from the same location as someone else, and then that other person becomes sick in a few days, the system can say, well, you're probably going to get sick as well. And they ended up predicting with 85% accuracy whether or not you'll become sick within the next 8 days. And then they released, which I think is just fantastic, and this has gone on to replace Google Flu Trends. They snapped up the guy straight away. So also there's been a little app saying where to go and where not to go if you don't want to get ill, which gives great potential for misuse. Because, for example, if you run a restaurant, all you need to do is check in at all your competitors' restaurants saying you feel very, very sick. Okay, slightly old news because the technology came from late last year, but this November, social media will be directly dispatching fire engines in Australia. There's a shiny new Australian fire engine. They have a huge problem in the outback in Australia. There are often bushfires in the very hot summers there, but the area is so sparsely populated that there's often nobody to raise the alarm. And suddenly, so if someone's seen something, maybe they don't think it's definitely a fire, they won't call the firefighters and raise the alarm. But they do go on social media and say, maybe I saw something, I think I saw something. And so these mentions can be grouped, and when they hit a certain threshold, and the weather conditions are right, and the environment is right, you can predict where the fires will be. And the model looks to be working pretty well, so from November, Tweets will be sending out fire engines. Let's talk a little bit about trust. So if hospitals, fire engines, earthquake predictions are all behaving based on information in tweets, then false information, false claims on social media become extra harmful. We really have to be very careful about what we pay attention to. And so the current project that we're working on at Sheffield, 36 months, started this year, one of the last FP7 projects, focuses on identifying false claims on social media and then categorizing them into maybe one of 4 categories. So we have rumors, and speculation, guesswork, misinformation, so information that's just flat wrong, disinformation, purposefully incorrect claims on social media. And the general goal here is just to address the question of who can you trust online? I think this has some wonderful applications. you could imagine you could develop a smartphone app after this that could act as a lie detector for what you hear on the TV or for politicians. You just get a buzz and a red light coming on, and you can leave them on all the time if you've turned on to Fox News. So, let's talk a little bit about responsibility. The general plan of many social media businesses and researchers has been something along the lines of collect tweets, do something, get investment, I think, and then free profit. How long do you think we should keep the data for as researchers, as people who are interested in it? Well, the NSA seems to think 15 years is probably okay, right? So anything you typed online, I guess in early 99, late 1998, is fine. If you typed it in the year 2000, well, we still have a copy, you know what we did. Hope you don't mind, that's definitely okay. What should we store and process? What kind of data should we feel confident as researchers or as people in industry keeping and logging about private individuals? Well, GCHQ, the UK intelligence agency, says, well, we only log metadata, so it's completely harmless, right? We're not storing anything too invasive about you. So here's a wonderful slide from the Chaos Computer Conference, where they make 3 fantastic points. Their first example, they know that you rang a phone sex service at 2:24 AM and spoke for 18 minutes. But it's okay, they don't know what you talked about. Your privacy is safe. They know you called the suicide prevention hotline from the Golden Gate Bridge, but the topic of the call remains a secret. What could possibly be going on? The third one, they know you spoke with an HIV testing service, then your doctor, then your health insurance company, all in the same hour. But they don't know what was discussed. They haven't logged anything invasive about you. Let's talk a little bit, finally, about bias. So most of the information we have previously in NLP, it comes from news text, which is like a laser, right? A single wavelength, very, very pure, very, very dedicated. Social media text is much broader. You get really noisy at the whole spectrum of things. And the reason for this is that most of our language artificial intelligence was trained on this news text. It has a little bit of bias, I guess, because it's written by people who are middle class, who tend to be middle class, working age, white men, educated in the US as a journalist in the 80s or 90s, and also following the Associated Press guidelines. So the range in which they express their ways is very, very narrow, and if you can only understand systems, if you can only understand text like this, you're going to have a lot of trouble. And we are having a lot of trouble. One of these impacts on our daily lives, so this guy is a journalist from the 1980s. One of the real impacts of this is that your phone rewards you directly with a smooth, easy transaction. If you talk and write like this, I guess maybe that's okay. But then it punishes you with failures and misspellings if you don't behave and speak exactly like this guy. That's not so cool. The Twitter bias that we see, I guess, is still there. What we see is that people are generally not German or Nordic because these nations hate using Twitter. They much prefer Facebook with its extensive privacy options. They tend to be young. It has quite low requirements. You're even allowed on if you're not a journalist. And it works beyond the 90s. Pretty good. But you do have some new requirements. For example, you need access to the internet. And also, you need access to Twitter. Sorry, Chinese people. So, to sum up, the big picture. We're racing ahead. We're really improving life quality directly with the tools that we're developing to support these kinds of applications that we're developing in Sheffield. And there is immense value in the perceived trivia of social media. And I guess the takeaway message is that understanding social media lets us help people better. Thank you.